Hello everyone. Most of you know the conventional robot, one that runs on battery and electricity and has many mechanical parts. But today I'm going to be introducing you to Dr. Ritu Raman, a scientist at the Langer Lab at MIT. She has developed muscle-powered robots called biobots, combining the biological and synthetic materials that runs on external stimuli. She has also developed novel 3D bioprinters and used them to build the biobots, and helped create a community of makers that build beyond biology. I'm sure you'll find this video as inspiring as I did, and it may even change your life. Dr. Ritu Raman gives us such a unique view and perspective on how we can build our dreams. There is so much valuable insight in every minute of this video, and I want to thank Ritu for passing forward all she knows to us, who have a similar dream to build and make. She's even more than an MIT scientist. She's part of our future. So let's jump right in and talk to her.
Okay. So, Ritu, can you describe certain special moments in your journey from your childhood to where you are now that led to where you are?
Sure. So I actually moved around a lot growing up. I was born in India. I lived in Kenya for a while. I moved back to India, and then when I moved to the United States in 2001, I bounced around a lot, even inside the States. So I ended up, before the time that I went to Cornell, where I did my undergrad, I went to 10 different schools, had instruction in 5 different languages, just kind of all over the place. And so for me, part of that experience, the most transformative part of that experience, see kids that I grew up with in the different schools and the different environments, different races and social and economic statuses. There was Facebook, and so I could see where they ended up as compared to kids in other places and where I ended up. And I think that the most special part of that experience for me, and the most important part of it for me, is seeing how big of a difference access to education makes, how big of a difference having any kind of opportunity to study more and learn more and do more to better the world around you. It makes a huge difference in the outcomes that you face as an adult, right? And within a few years, people that maybe seem like they're at the same level, maybe they're getting the same grades on tests, they're going to the same school, they all ended up in a variety of different places. And it's not because, I worked harder or I was smarter. A lot of it is just you got lucky, or you ended up going to a school that had a little bit more funding. So I think kind of probably the most special part of that aspect was just recognizing that if you give people access to education and opportunity, then they will be able to do something with that in the future.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Yeah. So can you describe some of your research in biobots?
Sure. So I am a mechanical engineer by training, and I chose mechanical engineering as my major in undergrad at Cornell because the reason I wanted to do science was because I wanted to be an astronaut, which I think is probably true for a lot of people. I didn't really know too much about what mechanical engineering was, but I knew it was called mechanical and aerospace engineering. So I was I'm going to do that so I get to be an astronaut. But I actually couldn't get into Intro to Aerospace Engineering in my freshman year. And instead I got put in this other class called Intro to Biomedical Engineering, where they talked about all of these medical devices and applications that I could make or pursue as a mechanical engineer. So that was really transformative for me, because before that I was I always thought being a doctor is really cool because you're helping people, but I also knew that I'm very squeamish around blood and touching things. So I was I'm never going to be able to do that. And then now I was oh, I can do something to help people and make people healthier and happier, and do that as a mechanical engineer. So I got really excited, and that kind of solidified me in this field of biomedical engineering. And then I got to graduate school at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I learned about this area of research and this project called biobots, which is basically they're thinking about, can we make robots using biological materials, and what are the advantages of doing this? And I was just really excited about that because before, I was just thinking like the way all mechanical engineers think, which is how do I use steel or ceramics or metals to build stuff? And this was the first time where somebody was saying, what if that's not all the materials that are available to you? What if you can also start building with biological materials, even if you aren't a biologist, even if you don't know a ton about this side of science? So yeah, that's kind of how I got interested in this field. And kind of the whole idea behind biobots is this idea that biological materials like your skin or your muscles can sense and respond to their environment in ways that synthetic materials traditionally can't. So if you cut your skin, you heal. If you exercise, you get stronger. So can we make robots using some of these materials or some aspects of these materials that can do that so that they are smarter and can respond to their environments?
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So like on that topic, like do you think like biobots will they be able to heal themselves or like relay the information or like the reaction to the surrounding stimulus to relay that back to heal themselves or to send the information to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely possible, and we're part of the way there. So, one of the papers that I did in graduate school was we had these robots that can walk around, and that walking is powered by skeletal muscle that we made in the lab. And I went in with a pair of scissors and I cut that muscle so that the biobot was basically damaged and couldn't walk anymore. And then I thought, if this were, a traditional robot, that's kind of the end of the road and it's done. And if we're using biological materials, we should show that they can heal and come back from it so that we can show that there's a real advantage to building with these types of biological materials. So then we went in and we healed the biobots using kind of the technique that the body uses, where it recruits new cells, it cleans up kind of the dead cells that are in the area. There are some like different proteins and growth factors that come in and accelerate not only the proliferation, so the growth of new cells in that area, but also the differentiation. So making sure that they're more mature and they can actually contract the way that skeletal muscle contracts in the body. So I sort of made this glue and this exercise protocol that was inspired by that, but like targeted to how our biobots were shaped, and showed that we could completely heal biobots within a few days of their damage. And I would call that healing, but it's not self-healing because I had to come in physically with a glue and I had to come in and exercise them, right? So I think we're still a ways from being able to say, like, what do we have to do so that that glue can be stored on the bot and released at will, or for it to detect and make some decision based on, like, I have lost a certain amount of my function and I want to regain that function. What do I have to do to get there? And this isn't actually a very complex decision. You don't need like a thinking to do this. It's just kind of like a go, no-go decision. Am I hurt? Yes, then I need to do this. So I think we can do it. I think we're a ways from that yet.
Yeah, that's amazing. So this technology is really adaptive. So where will it be able to be implemented or maybe replace conventional technology?
That's a great question. So I think generally when the kinds of biobots that I was making in graduate school, I was really focused on the idea of actuators. So things that convert some sort of chemical, electrical, optical signal into a force or like movement that you can see. So with that, I mean, we see actuators and robots and machines everywhere around us. And I would love to see places, especially where places where you have sort of limited space to work with, but you need a lot of force, because muscle is much more efficient than traditional synthetic actuators. I can see them kind of falling into place there. Personally, because I am most motivated by applications in healthcare and curing people of diseases, I see myself using biobots primarily in medical applications. And I also think that that's a lower bar for us to target, because one thing that's true about the kind of biobots that I make is we use cells derived originally from mammals. So they do need to be at 37C like your body is. They need access to like a certain amount of nutrients and like hydration. So if you put them inside the body, then they have access to all of those things and they can perform to their best of their ability. So I think technically it's easier for us to get there. And then personally, I'm just more motivated to pursue those kinds of applications.
So like, how to improve the lives of patients? Like, what would it be able to like heal the cells in our body, or like act as a glue, sort of?
So I think kind of like a very baseline application for something where we've just made new muscle could be just to replace old disease or damaged muscle. But that's the category of tissue engineering, which is this whole branch of biomedical engineering that's just how do we make cells and tissues in the lab to replace diseased or damaged tissues in the body. So I think that's kind of a very low-key bar, but that's not really a biobot because it's not sensing or responding. So then we need to be thinking about, like, are there places where maybe, your muscle works sometimes but not at other times? And then can we put in a biobot there that assists you when you need it, like when there's some sort of signal that the body is not receiving, and then the biobot is sensing that and responding it to some way. So I think when you need more of that smart response is when you see it. Another thing that we talk about, and it's not really possible at the scales that we are right now. So our biobots right now are on the order of a few millimeters. But if you could get them like much smaller, or get them in areas where they can move and walk around, you can think, oh, can we make a biobot that senses, that your tissue is torn here or damaged here, and it like moves towards that and then releases some sort of drug that is very targeted to that location and can help that specific wound heal. So I think that would be like an amazing end goal. And there are many kind of engineering steps that have to take place for us to get there. But I think that would be kind of one of the biggest dreams that I would have for them.
Yeah, that would really help like the healthcare system worldwide. So like when you mention biobots, so there's the bio and the bot aspect. So how did you like combine the biological and robotic aspect into like a singular self-functioning system?
That's a great question. And I think part of it too is I would encourage you, and I would encourage all of the engineers and aspiring engineers in the world right now to not think about them, biological and synthetic, as separate anymore. So my goal with this research and with the kind of research I want to do in the future is to just expand the set of materials that every maker or inventor has available to them. So in the same way that maybe people of a different era were working with stone or wood, and then they added on metals and polymers and ceramics, but they were still like building the same kinds of machines, they just had more materials to pull from. And so I'm just saying, and now we add this other class of biological materials, and sure, there are some constraints to working with them, like maybe they need to be kept warm or hydrated or fed, but there are also constraints to working with other things, like metals are very strong, but they're very heavy. Polymers are like very nice, but they might be like they're cheap to implement, but they're not as strong as metals. Ceramics are very strong, but they break, and when they break, they're brittle. So like there are constraints to working with all kinds of materials. All I'm saying is add this other thing in, and maybe there are some cases where this material can do something that none of the other materials can do. In terms of how the biobot itself works, it's kind of a two-part system where there's the muscle, which is kind of shaped like a rubber band, and we pop that around a 3D printed skeleton that's made of a very flexible polymer. So that polymer is kind of serving a dual purpose. One, it's keeping the muscle in that shape. So it's providing some sort of stretch stimulus that lets the muscle stay in that rubber band shape, keeps it under some amount of tension so it preserves the force that it can produce. And then it's also flexible so that when the muscle actually contracts, you see a big movement. And that was inspired a lot by how our body works. So if you think about in the body, you have bones that are rigid, and then you have this muscle that's connecting them. And the only reason that you see these big movements that we can make is because there's a joint, right? There's that flexibility built in. So that's the same thing we're trying to do with these flexible polymers, where I make a backbone that's kind of mimicking this joint, and then when the muscle contracts, we can see movements like this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool, like how you were able to do that. So, when you were trying to research the biobots, what were some of the obstacles you encountered?
Um, so I think the really interesting thing about working with these biological materials is biology is one of the fields that has, the longest history. We've been studying these kinds of materials for a very long time. But it's also one of the fields where there's so much we don't understand. And part of it is just, we had microscopes and then we had like microscopes that could see even smaller things. And so we're starting to pick out little by little. We're like, oh, the things we see as biological tissue are actually made up of cells. Oh, inside cells, there's actually this thing called DNA. Oh, actually, this DNA is built of something even smaller. So we have, over time, kind of understood a lot about biology, but there's also a lot that we don't understand. So then when you're going in as an engineer and you're like, I know that muscle can do this, so I'm going to try to make this muscle and I'm going to try to put it in this machine and it's going to work. Yes, sometimes that works if you think of that muscle as a black box. But whenever anything goes wrong, you need to then go back and think about what is it that's going wrong? Like, is the muscle getting tired? Or how is the muscle built inside the body? Or how does it heal inside the body? And sometimes you have the answers to those things from biology, and sometimes you don't. Um, and I think as an engineer, it's really hard because then you kind of have to face the fact that, like, you can't really solve that problem. You need to wait for biological engineers and biologists to get enough information about that. And maybe that'll be in a year, maybe that'll be 10 years from now. But there are definitely going to be times where you hit a roadblock, and based on your training and expertise, you might not be able to do anything about it, and you just have to wait for science to catch up. Um, and that's not just true for biobots, that's true for any field. Like, a lot of fields are what we call interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary right now, where they're drawing upon expertise and knowledge from people in a variety of different fields. So then sometimes you are going to get somewhere where you don't know the answer to something and you might ask the expert who's maybe knows a ton about neurons, and they're going to tell you, I don't know this thing yet, and nobody in this field knows this thing yet, maybe in 5 years. So I think that that's probably the most challenging thing for me.
So if you like had an unlimited research budget, what would you be doing?
Um, I think the first thing that I would be doing is I would take a fair amount of time to go to spend maybe like a year in hospitals around the country, around the world, trying to really understand what the biggest problems people are facing are in like the medical environment. I talk to surgeons, I talk to doctors, and I would try to identify problem regions where people need solutions and where the solutions would be much better made from biological materials rather than synthetic materials. Because the one thing I don't want to do, regardless of how much money I have, is just science for the sake of science. Like, that's nice, but that's not what motivates me. I really want to make things that people are going to use and that are actually going to help people. So you can't do that unless you understand your customer and your consumer. And I want kind of buy-in from those people right at the beginning, saying, I need this, and if you could build this for me, it would make my life better, it would help people, it would make sick people better. And so I think we don't always have the time and the resources and the money to really figure out what those needs are and understand them at a fundamental level. And so if I had that unlimited budget, I would first put a lot of front end time on like understanding the problems that our communities are facing before I just jump in and try to solve things with science without understanding them.
So like for me, I'm trying to use like smart materials to try to create like a living architecture where like buildings today like they're developing currently like carbon neutral buildings that just run on solar or wind energy and don't produce byproducts. But like not only that, but like by using protocells and smart materials to try to create a building that takes in carbon and uses that by incorporating like living protocells and like your research like biobots as well. So I've begun like with smart materials like with nitinol, and which has like the properties of like shape memory and shape regeneration, so it can like in a way heal itself when heated. And so and I'm looking to incorporate this into like space or like flight as well. So like NASA and SpaceX, they're currently looking for ways to like lighten their spacecraft, and like in a spaceship like today, when current things like when something goes wrong, like the whole spaceship can blow up. So interactive or smart materials, they can react to these issues and they can solve them. So this like to create a material like this, it requires like a huge trial and error observation period to try to run trials. So how is that like for you in your development of your biobot?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's, when we think about this kind of science, you always start with these end applications in mind. And those end applications are usually this really big problem that we're trying to solve. And you know that it's going to take several steps to kind of get there. And usually it's more steps and more time than you predict when you're about to start. But you also know that for each step that you make, there might be some product or some use beyond just your fundamental understanding of science being improved that you could make between now and the spaceship, right? So I think if you, for example, let's look at how I structured my PhD, where when I started off, I was told, can we make these robots that sense, process, and respond to a toxin? So they sense a toxin, they move towards it, they neutralize the toxin, and like that's the big picture goal. And I was like, yeah, cool, I'll make that my PhD. And we're nowhere near that, right? But what were the projects that were kind of leading up to that? So first I was like, oh, well, first I just need to figure out how to make a robot walk. And so I made the first generation of biobots, and we stimulated them with electricity. And that was fine. And it was, a big paper, and it was like, here's a demonstration of something that hasn't been done before. But then I was like, well, this electrical stimulation apparatus is actually really clunky and big. And so then we worked on genetically engineering the cells to respond to light, so then we could just flash an LED at them and get them to walk in one direction or another. That was also a big side progress where, one, we could target them with something that was smaller and like could move around, and also before they could only walk in one direction, and I got them to walk in any direction that I wanted. And then there was this, what if they get hurt? Can we heal them, right? So there were a lot of kind of baby steps along the way that I didn't necessarily see when I started off. And the timeline for all of that, so getting from no skeletal muscle powered robot to one that can heal, was about 4 years, which was really good. But it also, you then start thinking, if we need something that senses, right? Because this is just the walking part, we need to optimize the sensing part. If we need something that needs to make a yes/no decision, we need to work on that neuron part. We also need the sensing cell to talk to the neuron to talk to the muscle. And if we want something that then neutralizes a toxin, you need some sort of cellular factory that's secreting something that can neutralize a toxin. And then that needs to talk to the muscle also. So I, working alone, 4 years, cool, maybe we got one aspect of this, but we also need either me or other people working on all these other aspects and putting them all together, which is also not a trivial task. So I think when you're thinking about these kinds of big projects and what the timeline is, it's really good to identify your reach goal, which is, this is what I want to do at the end. But it's also good to kind of break it down to see what are the really big technical challenges that need to be addressed to get there, and then pick one and subdivide that further into, what can I do in 6 months? What can I do in 2 years? What can I do in 5 years? And don't be discouraged by that. If these things were easy to do, then you're not picking a hard enough project, right? so you just kind of start with a big goal because that's what inspires you. That's what inspires other people to give you money to do these things. But then you also are realistic with yourself and provide actionable goals that you can actually attain. So that at the end of, whatever, like at the end of my PhD, yes, I didn't build this thing that I initially thought was possible, but I made significant progress towards it and I didn't eliminate the possibility of that. And I am really proud of what I did because I went in and I subdivided it into goals that I could actually accomplish, and then I accomplished those. And I think that takes a lot of practice. So for me, when I first started off, I was, I think, much more optimistic about, well, like the timelines, right? I'm still very optimistic in that when I identify a problem, I know I can solve it. But before I'd be like, yeah, I can do this in 3 months. And now I'm like, 3 years. Because I know it's just hard. Science is hard and it takes a long time. And somebody once told me that if you like do all of the experiments from your PhD over again, most people's PhDs are on the order of like 5 to 7 years, right? But like if you wanted to do them all over again at the end of your PhD, it would probably only take you about 3 months because you would have figured out all of the little stuff that you messed up along the way, and so you could do it perfectly the first time. But that's when it's going to take. Yeah, my advice is to subdivide it into achievable goals, and then don't be too hard on yourself when it takes longer than you initially thought that it would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, you're a hardworking person, but like, who or what outside your field of study, um, like who or what helped you reach to where you are? Like,
Yeah, I think that's a very important question because it's important, I think, especially for young people when you look at someone who it seems like they've accomplished a lot or they seem like they're doing really well. It's hard sometimes to picture yourself in that position because it seems like they're just really smart and talented and they just got there. So I think it's really important for people who are a little bit further along like me to share how much support went into creating the product that you see and how much luck also went into creating the person that you see. So for me, I would say the people that are the most important in my journey are my mother, my father, my grandfather. They're all engineers. They all raised me, and I think they actually were very surprised that I wanted to do engineering because it was something that was never really talked about or openly acknowledged or suggested as a career for me. But I think just seeing them and seeing how they would, every time something was broken, they had the tools and the knowledge to just fix it and make things better. And like they had a sense of agency in their lives that I really responded well to. So even though it was never something explicit where it wasn't like, we love science, so you should love science, or here are these science toys for you to play with. It was more just, here are 3 people that I really love and respect and admire, and I see how they constantly make the world a better place around them just by identifying the small problems that they see in their homes or in their communities. So I would say that's kind of the biggest thing. It shaped my mindset, and because of them and how supportive they are, it was very easy for me to do the kinds of things that I wanted to do.
mm-hmm. So when did you realize that after this is what you wanted to do? Like when did you develop a sense of urgency that I really need to start doing this?
Yeah, I would say the urgency actually came before the engineering. So like part of what I was saying about growing up in all of these places and seeing different people have different access to opportunities, it kind of, I don't know how to say this. It kind of like I always had this feeling that if you're not doing something to improve your community, then what is your real purpose in life, and like what are you really doing? So it didn't matter to me what career I chose. It didn't have to be science. It doesn't have to be engineering. If I were a writer, I wanted to write books that made people think about things and inspire them to be better. If I were a singer, I would want to sing songs that make people happier and inspire them to be better, right? So it doesn't matter what career you choose. I think the urgency and the sense of purpose has to come before, because then, regardless of what path you take, you still know that at the end of your life, you've had a net positive impact on the world and the people around you. And that's what matters. So I think it's more important for that urgency and that sense of purpose to come first, because you might think that you want to do something, but maybe you don't get into a good school, maybe you know, you don't have enough money so you can't go, or maybe you don't get the job that you want. Your life is going to take a bunch of different turns that you don't foresee. So you can't bank on a career first. You have to bank on the sense of purpose first.
Yeah, and that's a great advice. So like, what are your thoughts on the last technical question? So like, what are your thoughts on how we're going for this symbiosis for biological, robotic, and smart material? Like, where do you want this to go, and what do you foresee in the future for this progress?
Um, so for me, I think one thing that I learned about myself while building biobots is that I really like kind of the early stage, like understanding the fundamental rules of building with biology. But maybe I'm not the best person always to build a robot around a specific application. There are a lot of people, a lot of engineers that I meet that I think are really, really good designers and manufacturers in ways that I'm not. They're really good at making clever uh, machines that target very specific problems in ways that I'm not. And so then I started this undergraduate class at the University of Illinois where I said, here's the technology, here is a muscle, here is like a 3D printed flexible skeleton. If you could build a biobot using this, what would you build? And the first year of that class, it's now in its fourth year, but the first year of that class, there were 8 students, and they all came up with such different answers and like different designs, and they built them and they worked, and that was just really cool for me to see. So I think kind of how I see the future for me in this field is you're going to have a set of people that are building actuators or processors or, you know, some sort of cellular factory. They're going to be kind of your foundational people. But then there's going to be this whole like generation of researchers around them who then take these and address specific applications using these tools. So they're the people that are really building with biology and kind of making the things that we want, right? So in the same way that if you look at a traditional field, there's people who make new kinds of metals and new kinds of polymers. And then there's people who use those to build medical implants or buildings or spacecraft. Those are all different people, but they're all pulling from this core of people. So that's kind of what I see the future of this field, where there's going to be the core materials development people, and then there's going to be a whole array of device and application people around them. And there's going to be a spectrum, kind of. Some people are going to be closer to this side, some people are going to be closer to that side. But in order for us to really start thinking about this as the next generation of engineering, we need all of those people on board.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. So, do you have any advice for young bioengineers in this changing and evolving world?
Yes. So I would say my most important piece of advice is to really find something that inspires and motivates you to work hard and do your best. So like you really need to find a problem in your community or your world where you're like, this really bothers me, because that's the sort of thing that's that sense of urgency, that's that sense of purpose that has to come first, because then you're going to go into lab and you're going to do a bunch of experiments and they're going to fail, and your natural response is going to be, I don't want to do this anymore, and you're just going to go home and be like, I'm done, right? But then when you wake up the next day, you're going to remember that that problem that you were trying to solve, that hasn't gone away anywhere. And most people will react to that by being, okay, well, maybe I can go tweak that one thing and see if we can get a little bit closer to it. My other thing would be that so first you want to find a problem, a real world problem that you're actually solving. And the other thing is to keep an open mind. I think a lot of scientists and engineers, especially as you go further along into your career, you're only interacting with other scientists and engineers, a certain way of talking, and you develop a certain set of like beliefs in your head about like, I think this is cool and important. Other scientists and engineers think this is cool and important. So I'm just going to do it. But then you might talk to someone on the streets and either not have the language to explain it to them in a way that they can understand, or they might be saying, I actually don't think this is useful and I actually don't want this. And so you're just building stuff in a vacuum that nobody's going to want to use in the future. So I think it's really important for every young engineer, every young bioengineer to talk to people outside of their field, learn how to talk to people outside of your field, and also learn to keep an open mind. So when you get pushback, don't just immediately dismiss it, or don't just immediately try to convince them that they're wrong and you're right because you're the scientist. Really listen to the people and their concerns that they're voicing, because maybe they don't have a PhD in engineering, but they might be like a great writer, they might be a philosopher, they might be a lawyer, and their perspective matters because they're the people whose lives you're trying to help. So really kind of create a diverse thought around you and your community, and I think that will really help.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Ritu. It's been a great time talking to you, and these answers were really helpful for anyone listening. And I hope as like your research progresses, like maybe we can continue this conversation. So yeah, thank you. Bye.
Yeah, that was great talking.
Okay.